On the 6th of December 2017, Finland celebrated its 100-year anniversary with a beautifully illuminated market square, parties until the early morning hours and, of course, a parade. The relatively young nation's independence was not just celebrated locally but also internationally. In Lisbon, for example, the Finnish flag was projected onto the Belém Tower. In Italy, the entire Colosseum shone in a magnificent blue all night long. Even the German Chancellor Angela Merkel had a few words to say that day.
Liebe Bürgerinnen und Bürger Finnlands, zum 100. Jahrestag der Unabhängigkeit Ihres Landes gratuliere ich sehr herzlich. Ich bin sehr froh und dankbar dafür, dass sich unsere beiden Länder seit langem eng verbunden sehen, wirtschaftlich, kulturell und auch politisch.
Funnily enough, there was a fascinating, albeit extremely short period in the fateful year of 1918 when these two nations were even closer together. Because during those chaotic months, the young kingdom of Finland was ruled by a German king from the House of Hesse. But let's turn back time a little bit more and begin from the start. Finland had been an integral part of the Kingdom of Sweden for centuries before Russia annexed it after its victory in the Finnish War of 1809. Under Russian rule, the Duchy of Finland enjoyed varying degrees of autonomy. For example, the old Swedish laws remained largely unchanged, and the area was not directly governed by the Tsar, but by a Senate in the new capital, Helsinki. Furthermore, the Lutheran faith was respected, the Finnish peasants were not turned into serfs unlike elsewhere in the empire, and there was no obligation to join the Russian army. All these kind gestures had the purpose of securing the duchy's loyalty, and it worked. When the Polish rose up against their Russian overlords in 1830, no such move was even attempted in Finland because there simply was no reason to rebel. Tsar Alexander II went even further. The Diet of the Estates was called again in 1863, after it had been practically banned in 1809. He also declared Finnish to be on par with Russian and Swedish and required that all state offices offer their services in this language. The reason he did this was to win over the general Finnish population and to counter the old Swedish elite, who still viewed the Tsarist Empire in a very negative light. It was because of this that the period under Alexander II is often regarded as sort of a golden era brought forth by the good Tsar. They even erected a beautiful statue for him in 1894, which you can still visit today. But all good things eventually come to an end. On the 15th of February 1899, Tsar Nicholas II issued the so-called February Manifesto. In protest, 1,063 scientists from 12 different countries signed a cultural address to the Tsar known as Pro-Finlandia. Vladimir Lenin called the manifesto a veritable coup d'etat. In Edvard Isto's painting called Attack, a young Finnish maiden can be seen desperately trying to defend her law book from the greedy two-headed Russian eagle. So, what exactly was so outrageous about the contents of this manifesto? Well, it's complicated. Essentially, it stated that laws, whether they originated in Russia or Finland, which affected both countries, should be put into the hands of Russian constitutional procedures. The Grand Duchy's task was to deal with laws solely concerning Finland. It could also form an opinion on the imperial legislation, not that anyone cared. In the eyes of the Russians, nothing much changed. The manifesto merely established a procedure for laws of Russia that also applied in Finland, and for Finnish laws that affected Russian conditions or the interests of the state as a whole. As historian Osmo Jusila puts it, the February Manifesto was not a major change, but rather a codification of the existing order. From the Finnish point of view, there were a few problems with this. For instance, there was no clear and defining line which separated imperial and local legislation. The Russians argued once again that absolutely nothing has changed because the Tsar always had the supreme power to decide what was local and what was not. For many Finns, the main problem with the manifesto was not whatever had changed, but what it showed and made abundantly clear: Finland was not a state separate from Russia. Many people bought into this false ideal and maintained that laws should be made by mutual agreement between those two countries. To the Russians, of course, this was all utter hogwash. Finland was a colony and nothing else. It's just that Nicholas II was a lot less subtle about it than his predecessors, which didn't turn him any favours at all. Resistance grew even stronger when Russia introduced a new conscription law and made Russian the language of administration. It peaked in 1904 when the Governor-General of Finland, Nikolai Bobrikov, was assassinated in Helsinki by a young nationalist called Eugen Schauman. Just 1 year later, a week-long general strike broke out as a form of protest against Russia's losing war against Japan. The end result of all this was the creation of the modern Parliament of Finland. Fun fact, women in Finland were the first in Europe to be given the right to vote. The Russian authorities were forced to make some concessions. The controversial February Manifesto was temporarily suspended and the conscription law was completely abolished. Yay! Russia, of course, was not too pleased with any of this. The new Russian Duma attempted to restrict Finnish autonomy as much as possible and regularly demanded extremely high payments. Nicholas II was effectively trying to fully Russify Finland, but his efforts were halted with the outbreak of the First World War. The war did not affect Finland a whole lot. The only Finns fighting for the Tsar were a handful of volunteers, and the country never became a battleground. Some Finns, however, decided to do things a bit differently. About 2,000 young men made their way to Germany through Sweden to become part of the 27th Prussian Jägerbataillon and to gain some valuable combat experience. Remember them, because they're going to become important later. When the February Revolution of 1917 overthrew Tsar Nicholas II, Finland considered the personal union to be over and that the country should finally be independent. Russia's provisional government wasn't willing to give up this reindeer-infested land so easily and dissolved the Finnish parliament. But not just that. The social situation also threatened to completely blow up. Years of hunger and unemployment had led to an extremely unhappy general population who began to organise themselves in the Red Guard, willing to fight for their rights. On the 6th of November 1917, Vladimir Lenin and the Bolsheviks took over power in Petrograd. Lenin hoped that the social tensions in Finland would lead to another revolution of the working class. And indeed, the Finnish workers organised a general strike and the Red Guard started to gain almost complete control. Just a bit over a week later, the strike ended over uncertainty about how matters should continue. Seizing this opportunity, the new bourgeois parliament rushed a formal declaration of independence on the 6th of December 1917. Russia recognised Finland's independence about a month later, with Germany and the Scandinavian countries following suit. Class tensions exploded once more when Parliament decided to form its very own army on January 12, 1918, which the working class saw as a step taken to further repress the already destitute general population. And so the Red Guard decided to take matters into their own hands and took control over the entirety of southern Finland, including the town of Tampere. Finland was now officially at war with itself. The government forces with their headquarters in Vasa were unable to regain control, and so the front stabilised for a few weeks. That was until Germany decided to interfere, and they brought friends with them. The Finnish volunteers who had left the country all those years ago were back, and they were ready for some action. With German support, the so-called Whites managed to push back the so-called Reds. After some heavy fighting, Finnish government forces managed to take back a badly damaged Tampere, and in April German troops conquered Helsinki. The Red Guard had no chance but to surrender. But hold on a second. Why exactly did the Germans interfere when they had clearly bigger fish to fry on the Western Front? Well, Mr. Bean, I am glad you asked. After it had knocked Russia out of the war, Germany hoped to establish a so-called Germanic barrier in Eastern Europe. The plan was to gain significant economic and political influence in not just Finland, but also in Poland, the Baltic states, and the Ukraine. On March 7th, shortly before the end of the Civil War, Germany and Finland signed 3 separate treaties, granting the Germans trade preferences and the right to establish military bases whenever they pleased. But the Finns also had great reason to cooperate with the German Empire. At this point in 1918, it still looked as if Germany was going to emerge victorious out of the First World War. After all, Russia had been defeated, Italy had been pushed back all the way to Venice, and the joint spring offensive promised to finally bring France to its knees. It very much looked as if Europe would henceforth be dominated by the Germans, so it seemed to be a good idea to establish positive relations with them. It also seemed to be the only country that could potentially prevent a Russian attempt at reconquering its lost land. In May of 1918, a heated debate broke out in the Finnish Senate over the future form of government. In the end, the monarchists led by the Senate chairman, Per Evin Svinhufvud, asserted themselves. They demanded that Finland be led by a German king, preferably one from the prestigious House of Hohenzollern. To Swinhufvud's disappointment, the Kaiser refused to make one of his children or any member of the Hohenzollern dynasty king of Finland. Another candidate would have been Count Adolf Friedrich zu Mecklenburg, the former governor of German Togo, but he wasn't very popular and so a compromise was met. Prince Friedrich Karl von Hessen seemed to be the perfect candidate. He was married to Margarete von Preußen, the Kaiser's youngest sister. This would have ensured a direct link between Finland and the German Emperor. On the 5th of September 1918, Friedrich Karl von Hessen received a Finnish delegation in Frankfurt. He was asked if he was ready and willing to accept the crown of Finland. The prince wasn't really sure about this and asked if he could be given a few days to properly think about it. 4 days later, he accepted under the condition that he would receive a majority of the votes in the Finnish parliament. And indeed, on the 9th of October, Friedrich Karl received 64 out of the 108 votes. 3 experts immediately travelled to Germany to teach Friedrich Karl von Hessen and his wife everything they needed to know. Those poor souls had to learn Finnish, for example, and I can't possibly imagine the immense pain they had to go through to learn this cursed language.
Perkele, siihen koske saatana vie.
They were also taught about the history, the culture and the politics of Finland. A crown was designed for him and there were plans to build a beautiful royal residence. Karl Friedrich would never actually set foot in Finland, however, because only a month later, a revolution broke out in Germany and the monarchy was completely abolished. Germany had lost the war, after all. This made matters extremely awkward back in Finland because the country could never hope for British and French support with a German king at its head. It was absolutely crucial now to get rid of the king and to become a democracy. Luckily, Friedrich Karl realised that clinging on to the crown was pointless. On the 14th of December, he renounced the throne and never made any attempts to regain it. Finland had been a monarchy for just about 73 days. The crown was never actually finished, but you can still see a replica in the city of Kemi. Shortly after, Finland became a republic, which it remains to this day.